Hey, what's up? Welcome back to Ground Zero Salem. I'm Pat. Got another Monday update for you here. Yet another hectic day where I'm trying to get stuff done around the house. Got to work later, family's upstairs. What a better time to sit down and make a video than when I have a million different things going on. But I felt compelled. I've been kind of concocting and thinking of stuff to talk about for a skate rock themed video, which is a weird niche genre within punk and metal that sort of revolves more around like a physical activity than really a sound. You know, it seems like to be considered skate rock, there's got to be some songs about skateboarding and more members that skateboard or themes. So I thought that'd be kind of a fun thing to try to tackle. I was inspired to finally get off my ass and do it by Matt from The Dark Path. Thank you, Matthew, who did a contest entry for a guy named Raul Cerrano, is a new YouTuber. Just hit 100 subs, so congratulations to Raul. The contest is talking about 5 favorite records from a particular genre. So I figured while I'm babbling on and on about whatever the fuck skate rock is, I would also talk about my 5 favorite releases from those kinds of bands. Skate rock was coined, I believe, by an editor over at Thrasher magazine in the early 80s who went by the name Mofo. He has a hard to pronounce or hard to remember actual name, Mosin Frosch, something like that. I'll put a little caption. There's umlauts. So shorten to Mofo, you know, much like Craig Stesick, who helped kind of define the aesthetic of the original Zephyr team, the Z-Boys, and kind of created an aesthetic for the Bones Brigade and all that early 80s skateboarding. Thrasher was kind of right along with it for kind of defining a culture of skateboarding, which was intrinsically, symbiotically connected to punk. Like, punk and hardcore and skateboarding were really synonymous with each other for a very long time. It seems like they drifted apart somewhat sometime in the mid-90s, where there were plenty of people who were into punk, but it had expanded so much after street skating kind of took over. Lots of people into other types of music got involved in it, and it was still as much of a counterculture sort of thing as always, but it got a little bit more mainstream acceptance, and it wasn't just punk types that were into it. That's what I gathered from it. There was plenty of other cultural stuff kind of tied into skateboarding in the late 80s too. Like, a lot of people that were into skateboarding were into like some of the cock rock at the time. You see guys like Christian Asoy, who, you know, hung out with the Red Hot Chili Peppers, but it had roots in hardcore punk for sure. And the skate rock compilations really kind of helped that along. Those were created by Mofo, who played in the band The Drunk Engines, who we'll talk about. And they just kind of always sort of curated a nice list of people that played in bands that had songs about skateboarding, people who were skateboarders themselves. A lot of the music, at least on the early ones, was like hardcore and punk, with some kind of interesting avant-garde bands here and there. Later on into the late 80s, you had more like youth crew kind of bands and like straight edge hardcore. I know Early Integrity, there's an Early Integrity song on Skate Rock. I don't even remember which one, 7 or 8, one of those. You had bands like Septic Death, because Pusshead, of course, did artwork for Zorlak skateboards. Lots of stuff was involved. And the skate rock comps kind of petered out by the early to mid 90s, I want to say, but they came back for a couple volumes. I don't own any. I don't have any to show off. For whatever reason, I mean, when I was a kid, when they came out, I saw them advertised in Thrasher and said to myself, I've never heard of these bands. I don't know. Except for JFA, I've never heard of these bands, so I never bought them. And now they're pretty expensive. Like, we're talking 50 to 60 bucks for a cassette. Someday I'll track them down. Some of them anyway. I'd like the first 2 or 3 at least. So I don't have any actual skate rock compilations that Thrasher put out, but I do have a ton of the bands that were featured on them, as well as how skateboarding themed hardcore, thrash, punk, etc. kind of progressed into the 2000s. So that's what we'll be talking about, as well as my favorite records. So you can't really begin a video talking about skate rock unless you talk about JFA from Arizona. Interesting that it wasn't a band from California that you think of first thing, but there is a huge scene for skateboarding in Phoenix where these guys are from. Like the whole full pipe thing where people would skate these gigantic drainage pipes in the desert. That was a thing out there. I believe they had their share of empty swimming pools as well. Also, Brian Brannon, who was in this band, was sponsored, vocalist there, was sponsored by Santa Cruz Speed Wheels. He's in a Speed Wheels video. He might have had other sponsorships and competed. I'm not sure about that. But this is a classic of just early 80s American hardcore punk with a little touch of surf instrumental influence on a few songs. Certainly if you like stuff like Dead Kennedys and Minor Threat, it's not that either of those bands sound remotely like each other if you are familiar with that kind of hardcore punk stuff, but it's got that kind of fast, scrappy energy to it. Really, really good bass player. The bass goes off on its own and does a lot of cool things on it. This is entitled Beyond the Valley of the Yakes, which is included on this discography CD. We Know You Suck, which was put out by Alternative Tentacles sometime in the early 2000s. This also includes the Blatant Localism EP, which is one of the most important skate punk records. It has Beach Blanket Bong Out on it, which a lot of you might remember from, I believe it's the first Tony Hawk soundtrack. Tony Hawk's Pro Skater. Can't wait for the new one to come out. You also have Los Olvidados in that series. They were a Bay Area band. It's funny because a lot of the skate rock stuff, or not funny really when you think about it, a lot of the skate rock stuff is from the Bay Area, which when I actually think about it, it makes sense because that's where Thrasher was located, as well as Independent Trucks, who helped put the money to put Thrasher out, Fausto Vitello. But Los Olvidados, super melodic, energetic, very rock and roll based punk rock stuff. We're not talking hardcore here. This doesn't thrash. You don't have circle pit beats. It's real like mid-tempo, fist in the air kind of stuff. Pretty snotty, really, really good. Los Olvidados formed a band with Mofo on vocals called the Drunk Engines. This is another collection. And both Los Olvidados and Drunk Engines, it looks like they didn't have a lot of like full lengths. These are all compilations of like comp songs, like from the skate rock compilations and EPs and demos and stuff like that. From Where the Sun Now Stands, I Will Fight No More Forever. Drunk Engines, kind of a proto-Guar thing. They all had these like monster ghost masks of Native Americans, and they claimed they were like channeling the spirits of dead Native Americans when they were doing their ghost thing here. And the music itself is pretty apt with that. It sounds a lot like, there's some songs that sound straight up like they're ripping off Joy Division, but it's more aggro and punk, which is cool. A good example of like maybe early death rock even. Very fucking cool shit. Then you had The Faction. That's Steve Caballero. This came cheap. Got it on the cheap. Doesn't have a pack. But The Faction was Steve Caballero, who was a pro skater for Powell, if you know anything about 80s pro skateboarders. The Faction did a lot. They were a legit band. He split up a lot of his time between demos and tours with this band. They put out a lot of stuff. I mean, this is a collection CD, and there's 28 songs on this. They put out a bunch of records, and they were very good. Also had some dark themes. I wouldn't say they're quite as like gothy sounding as a Drunk Engines, but definitely had that like, you know, West Coast punk melodicism to them. Good band for sure. Then a band, I just picked this up just to check it out. I never owned anything by these guys up until maybe a month or two ago when I started deep diving on this stuff again. This is Aggression. This is a nardcore band from Oxnard, California. Big scene up there, of course, with Dr. No, Ill Repute, plenty of others. And this is also pretty straightforward California, like hardcore punk stuff. There's nothing that really stands out too much to me. It's solid. Like a lot of bands from that scene, you have the Love and Rockets guy, I think Gilbert Hernandez, doing art. Him and his brother have a very similar art style, but I think that's Gilbert. So a lot of those bands had their art done by the same Same two dudes who did, or it's three brothers that did Love and Rockets. So yeah, Aggression's good. I haven't really absorbed this one that much. Yeah, snotty, fast, somewhat melodic California hardcore. Then you had Slam. This just came as a freebie, which was cool, with another Skate Rock Bands LP that I ordered. Wild Riders of Boards. This was a song featured on one of the Skate Rocks, one of the earlier ones. Actually, the name of the compilation was Wild Riders of Boards, now that I'm remembering. But this is just a one-track kind of deal. It's two different versions of the same song. End of Laughter LP and this version from the comp there. And again, like Aggression, it's just pretty snotty, pretty pissed. Not too fast, but up-tempo skate rock, punk rock. This is also another recent pickup of mine. This is Code of Honor, another San Francisco band. Code of Honor, real good workman-like early 80s hardcore. Super energetic, like angry teenage stuff. A lot of like hating the government, hating the man, kind of anti-system lyrics, as well as like songs about unity and stuff like that. Really great like guitar solos on it. It's got that really great hyper melodic, like before California punk got, some might say, too melodic, you know, with Fat Records and Epitaph and stuff, but like tuneful kind of shit. You know, it doesn't really seem that out of place from stuff like DI and the Adolescents and that era of stuff. And then Sick Pleasure is on the flip. Not sure if they're considered a skate rock band or not, but similar kind of style musically. This was reissued on Radiation Records. Originally came out in 1982. So pretty early example of skate rock. And finally, one more from the Bay Area with the Boneless Ones. Skate for the Devil came out on Boner Records in 1986. This band was a bit different, I feel like, than some of their contemporaries like Los Olvidados and Drunk Engines, even though I think those bands were a couple years beforehand. These guys were a little bit like, they weren't straight up thrash metal. They were like a weird kind of take on crossover. They definitely had a melodic, like California sort of like punk approach, but like kind of like choked up, chuggy kind of guitars, and even some kind of slower Sabbathy parts going on. Yeah, super snotty crossover, basically. Really good band. Nothing quite sounds like them. Exactly. You know, they don't sound like DRI, they don't sound like Suicidal or anything like that. Then you start getting into some other stuff outside of that area. You go down south, and I'd be remiss not to mention another one of my favorite records. We'll say this is number 2. Possessed to Skate. The Possessed to Skate EP or single, 12-inch single by Suicidal Tendencies. I mean, Suicidal was huge for this. Mike Muir's brother was Jim Muir, who was part of the original Dogtown team, helped start Dogtown Skateboards. Let's see, this is, I'm sure, is a Dogtown deck, this Suicidal deck. You know, it was Mike Muir and Jay Adams who kind of adopted that cholo look and brought it into the hardcore punk scene. Before, like, even New York, I think one of the examples of, like, dudes from punk, you know, not dressing like guys from England, kind of bringing in more of a street style native to America into their visual aesthetic. And this is the beginning of Suicidal crossing over. I feel like even going back to the self-titled, they had a metal edge just with those shredding solos and everything. This is even more of like a speed metal, palm muted kind of approach, even though I want to say Possessed to Skate does have a definite California punk kind of execution with the chorus in particular. Side B has Human Guinea Pig and Two Wrongs Don't Make a Right, but they make me feel a lot better. And for whatever reason, I think it's just the mastering on this. It sounds, as far as I know, it's the same recording as Join the Army, the second record on which this appears, but this just sounds better to me. Maybe it's just the mastering for a 12-inch or whatever. It sounds louder, sounds better. I don't know why. What did this come out on? Caroline Records. And of course, really cool, you know, shots of people shredding on the back there. And then, you know, you had skate rock from all over the place. Beyond Possession, for example, were from Canada. Telltale Heart. This is a fucking great record. Song Skater's Life. And it's also approaching crossover, but not quite there. Definitely like thrashy hardcore, though, real fast. Came out sometime in the mid-'80s, I want to say. Probably 86 or something like that. Don't know off the top of my head. Who researches, right? I also said don't know off the top of my hand. Anyways, fucking really good. And then they did a follow-up LP that something about Canadian bands. This is Beyond Possession. Something about Canadian bands, like these guys were crossover-ish, still punk on this, got their metal chops up a bunch, but these guys, DBC, Infernal Majesty, I might be reaching a little bit with that. You know, Voivod being the kings of just having like weird, lurching, experimental elements. Like Beyond Possession definitely go off on some weird twists and turns on this, and more I listen to it, the more I like it. I've owned this before, once on tape and once on LP. It was always like a $1 bin banger 10 years ago, and before that, I remember seeing it back in the 90s, and it was always like $5-6, and I think now it goes for like 20, but I never really appreciated it that much until this round of spending time with it. You know, it certainly holds on to the hardcore influence. There's a lot of songs on this. It's a good 19 songs or something like that, but it also has like kind of interesting approaches to songwriting and kind of, you know, weird choices as far as like stops and starts and stuff like that. Cool Canadian band. And of course, the East Coast was involved in this stuff too. This goes to my favorite number 3. You know, all these skate rock records that I love, 1 through 5, they're not really in any particular order. I love them all very much for different reasons, but Token Entry's Jaybird is one of them. Number 3 that I'm mentioning. Queen's band was around early on in New York hardcore. I'd say they began maybe at the second era of New York hardcore. The first era being very, very early Agnostic Front, The Abused, Antidote, stuff like that. I think these guys probably started towards the end of that and were subsequently friends with and played with Gorilla Biscuits and Side by Side in those bands. Yeah, these dudes started as early as 85. And they were like an example of like a New York band that was kind of lighthearted. They had serious songs, you know, about struggling and working too much and, you know, friendships and stuff like that. But they had songs about skateboarding, like the song Jaybird, which is one of my favorite songs about skateboarding ever. All that I want to do is skate. And they had kind of a posy, melodic kind of approach that not too many bands from New York had. Gorilla Biscuits came afterwards and were no doubt sort of influenced by them, I think. And I think like American Standard was a exception to the rule, you know, not having gruff vocals, which is kind of funny because the original Token Entry vocalist, Anthony Comunale, went on to sing for Killing Time, who are definitely like the blueprint for hard guy, metallic New York hardcore, like Madball and stuff like that. But this was their second LP, Token Entries, Jaybird. This was re-released on Go-Kart. I want to say the original pressing came out on Hawker Records, which was a subsidiary of Roadrunner back in the day. But super good shit. Ernie Parada, the guitarist, has been in a bunch of bands, all of which I love and grew up with, including Black Train Jack, who are like, did have like still like an NYHC edge, but were even poppier and were great. And Gray Area, who are also kind of along the same lines, like almost like pop punk, but really good. I don't like a lot of stuff that sounds like pop punk, but I loved them. And it's funny because there's a lot of stuff I was considering for this, but so much of it was just stuff that skaters listen to, you know? There's so much you could say is skate rock that was just popular with skateboarders during any given era. For example, if you wanted to go just by music that was in skate videos, like you'd have to include Dinosaur Jr. and St. Vitus, you know, because that was big in Santa Cruz videos back then, or Farside, the melodic punk kind of early emo band that Zach De La Rocca was in at one point. They were in a GNS video. later on, Jackson 5 was like really prominent in, I think, a New Deal video. I think that's what it was, or a World Industry video, one of those Rocco related companies. Of course, hip hop got really popular with skaters for a long time. There's like classical and skate videos. So I'm trying to stick to and adhere to stuff that actually has skateboarding themes or people that skate in the band or something like that. Like I said, it's sort of like a, kind of a loose genre, if you want to even really call it that. For example, I don't think anybody considers Breakdown from New York a skate punk band or a skate rock band, but they prominently have a skateboard on the cover of their legendary 87 demo, and everybody's, this guy's repping the same deck right there. Kind of the same thing with Crackdown, who are from the same scene. There's a dude doing a sweet wall ride on the back there, but they might have been on the skate rock comps. There were a lot of those. I'm trying to remember. No songs about skateboarding though, so. But brings me back to the East Coast and talking about that. There are a few more notable bands other than Token Entry, like Underdog, who had a song called Frontside Grind. Definitely a skate anthem. Certainly, like, also, as angsty and pissed and could beat your ass as any of the NYHC bands, but also had sort of like a certain melodicism to him. Richie Birkenhead, the vocalist who went on to Into Another, was a great singer, great set of pipes, heavily influenced by HR from the Bad Brains, but had his own style. And a lot of that early stuff had almost like a slight tinge of kind of a surfy thing going on a little bit on the demos, which is what this record compiles. It's called Demos. There are 2 demos from the mid-'80s. They did a slightly more metallic record called The Vanishing Point that had a little bit more like in the way of blazing solo work and stuff like that, courtesy of the chief songwriter from this band, Mick Rad, who are from Philly. Chuck Treese. Chuck Treese was a fucking shredder. Mick Rad also had the honor of being on, I believe, several Powell videos. I think they're on Public Domain and Propaganda, maybe, but they were in a bunch of Powell skate videos during like Ray Barbie's part, and I think a few like montages with a bunch of different street skaters when street style, as it was called at the time, was blowing up. But yeah, this band also kind of had kind of a pronounced Bad Brains influence, at least in the fact that they did a bunch of reggae stuff and weaved that in with the punk. It was a lot less like, there's just something about New York hardcore that just has that metallic, like hard pitting kind of, thing. This stuff is a bit more lighthearted, I feel like. It's a little bit more like, just riding a mini ramp, pulling off some lip tricks, that kind of thing. Maybe less slamming on a huge vert ramp kind of vibe. Oh, before we wrap up the 80s, I should be mentioning the UK, which I don't have too much to talk about, but there is that era of UK hardcore from the very late 80s when a lot of American hardcore took a shit. And there were just a handful of bands like the Stupids, who really, if you watch documentary footage of them, they're really trying hard to dress American. They're like all wearing flipped up caps. They're all like wearing neon. They're like dressing more like the stereotype of an American skater than any American skaters at the time. It's kind of funny. Their music's cool. It's very much almost like a British take on melodic American hardcore punk, like West Coast kind of stuff, but it's got that really nasty, very fast, like heresy, I won't say Napalm Death like musically, but rhythmically almost, like that really blasty, thrashy kind of thing. So almost like a Boston meets LA kind of thing. This is Boston and LA, I guess you could say. But yeah, it's basically a Brit take on skate thrash. There's footage of them skating. There's no songs about skating on this, but I believe they had them. Cool band. This is Peruvian Vacation on Boss Tunage Records, which has a ton of bonus tracks. And then, believe it or not, I don't know how they skated with like their charged hair and their like clothes rotting off of them. But Chaos UK happened to have a song called Skate Song, so I'll just mention that. Skate rock, I don't know. Great British punk, yes, definitely. Not really too much like black or death metal that is skate themed. I think those genres probably are a little bit too serious or take themselves too seriously. But one Jeff Whitehead was a sponsored pro, and here he is on the cover of Skate or Die 2 for Nintendo, doing a sick fast plant, boneless, something like that. Yep, there it is. Grim as fuck. All right, so then we get into the 90s, and, you know, it was a kind of a trend. And like I mentioned earlier, skateboarding kind of evolved, started like involving other types of culture, kind of went away from being an exclusively punk thing, but I think there remained to be like in very underground DIY hardcore of certain stripes a love for skateboarding. For example, Code 13, Felix Von Havoc, his 90s band after he did Destroy, had a song about old school skateboarding. What was it called? I don't remember. Mondo Aggro. Yeah, Mondo Aggro. You had Spaz, of course, and that was huge because Max Ward played in Plutocracy before that. I think they had songs about skating too, if I'm remembering right. Spaz had tons of songs about skating. There were songs about either complete nonsense and like just people they knew and goofy shit they were up to, skateboarding, graffiti, occasionally like bands and other stuff, like music stuff, but yeah, tons of songs about skateboarding. Sir Wax-a-Lot being my favorite. He can't even do a slappy. You know, goofy power violence with lots and lots of climbs and weird grind parts and occasionally odd jazzy shit. One of the better bands of that genre. Put out a lot of stuff. And there's not really, I mean, Jelly Roll Rockheads were a Japanese band that I think this was the very end of the 90s that had some skate themed stuff. And there was this compilation, Possessed to Skate Volume 1. This had a ton of those bands, a ton of those power violence bands. You had Charles Bronson on there, you had Spaz on there, Asshole Parade, Pretentious Assholes, Unanswered, Palatka, Despise You. You know, it's very much a California thing, the whole power violence thing, so it kind of went hand in hand with skateboarding. And there's tons and tons of skate-themed songs on this. Almost all of them are skate-themed. There's a song called As Fucked as Gator by Charles Bronson. If you know the story with Mark Rogowski, you know what that's about. They cover a Faction song, You Will Go. Yeah, this is a great compilation. If you like that, you know, power violence, grind kind of hardcore stuff. There was even a sequel that came out early 2000s. This is the second volume of Possessed to Skate. And this only had 4 bands on it. ETA, Epileptic Terror Attack, who were from Sweden. Life Set Struggle, who were California, I think. Breakfast, another Japanese band. And Scholastic Death, and that was one of the projects that Max did after Spaz. Scholastic Death were a lot of fun. They were kind of almost like a heresy band, but they had tons of songs about being a nerd and being a student and skateboarding. I think Max actually billed them as Heresy with Glasses at one point. And ETA were awesome. Epileptic Terror Attack, they were very much like a DC kind of sounding band to my ears at the time. They were like Minor Threat and like Teen Idols, kind of early 80s American style hardcore. I saw them with DS13 a bunch of times when I was over in England, and they were really, really good. So moving on to the Rebirth and the 2000s. So this brings me to number 4 of my favorites from the skate rock genre. This is Bones Brigade's I Hate Myself When I'm Not Skateboarding. So this was an era that there was kind of heavy nostalgia was really starting to kick off for the previous century, previous decades before. Skateboarding had witnessed kind of a rebirth thanks to the X Games. There were concrete parks being built everywhere. And there was one in my hometown. I started skating again because I never got good at street skating. I never could do stair sets over like 3 steps. I barely could kick flip, if at all, let alone tray flip or, even impossible. I quit skating. I got frustrated with it. I got into other stuff. I got into death metal and music. But with the concrete parks, you could just cruise around really fast. I kind of learned how to skate on transition a little bit, which was kind of easier for me to do than tricks and stuff. You could learn how to carve and grind, and that was very fun. So I started skating again regularly. And a bunch of these bands came out that were sort of a rebirth of skate thrash, including all the bands on that previously mentioned Possessed to Skate Volume 2. And probably the most important and most well-known one was Bones Brigade, number 4 here. I hate myself when I'm not skateboarding. This is a reissue here on Coalition Records. This originally came out on Porcel from Youth of Today's label. Can't remember the name of it. This is the first album. These guys did 3 full lengths and a bunch of other stuff, singles and, a demo. I don't think they were on any comps. This is the only full length with their first vocalist, Andrew, who went on to do Cut the Shit, and it's just the best of both worlds as far as like worshiping early to mid 80s hardcore and just weaving in just enough thrash metal as far as keeping the riffs super tight and super interesting. Catchy as hell. It's over in about 20 minutes. It's just a full-on assault on your senses. Never lets up. Very angsty and fucking pissed and fun at the same time. And then you also had another one of my favorites. We'll throw this in at number 5. Skate Korpse from Rochester, New York. These guys were very much doing a worship of JFA. It's very like surf influenced, low on the distortion in the guitars, kind of scrappy punk rock stuff, but man, does it rip. This is just more or less a discography LP of everything they did. And I think this is I don't know if this is a test pressing or what. I've seen other versions of this that don't look like this. I think this was a special release for a specific show or something. I don't remember, but came out on Feral Kid Records out of Rochester. Great stuff. Yeah, definitely not talked about a lot, but certainly if you like JFA, this is like almost a worship band. And I skated with these guys a couple of times, and they were very, 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 very good at skateboarding. Punks Before Profits, this came out on as well, which was, I believe, a defunct Now record label out of Rochester. And I got some more comps. These were all skatecore comps, 1 through 3. There was supposed to be a 4. I don't think it ever came out. They come out on Element Records. And these had a lot of the bands that were popular in the early 2000s. You got the Swarm from Canada on here. A band called H Street. Die Hard Youth. A lot of stuff I don't really remember too well. This one has some pretty big names for the time. You have Tear It Up, who were a great fast hardcore band from the beginning of fast hardcore starting to come back. Crispus Attucks, who were from Virginia, Baltimore area, I think. They were really good. You have Holier Than Thou, who were another example of like really, really good kind of like suicidal homage, not directly ripping them off, but like very West Coast thrash metal kind of stuff. Third Degree, Killed in Action, who were from Ohio. And then this one, you have Backstabbers Inc., which is an interesting choice because they were more of like a noisy, metallic kind of hardcore band, kind of more in the sort of like almost the Converge arena of things. Life Set Struggle, Fields of Fire from California. Scholastic Death, again. Youth Riot. So these were fun. I actually just rebought these. They're all a couple of bucks. This is the Holier Than Thou 7-inch. This band did a bunch of stuff. Couple of full lengths, 12-inch EP. Very, very good band. Definitely recommend it to anybody that's into crossover or thrash for sure. And just to mention it, this is the second Bones Brigade LP, Focus. They got a different singer on this, whereas their first singer, Andrew, had kind of just like a straightforward, powerful American hardcore vocalist kind of style, you know, not too kind of shouty, not too far away from maybe something like Minor Threat or whatever. Just sounds like an angry dude yelling. This guy also sounds like an angry dude yelling because it's fucking hardcore, but this guy had more of a gravel-throated sort of John Brannon, Chris Notaro from the Crumbsuckers kind of deal going on. And the music's a little bit more metal. You know, it's not like they're going full on into really long, complex songs or anything, but it's tightened up a bit. There's more solos. There's more of like kind of almost like some twin Iron Maiden leads here and there. Focused is a really, really good record. I also got Endless Bummer on CD, their third record, which is okay, but it almost sounds kind of like they're starting to go through the motions on it a little bit or something. They have this really tight approach to like playing fast riffs where I think technically it's considered triple picking, but it's that kind of like they do that really, really well, and they do it a lot. So yeah, Bones Brigade, who are from the Boston area, by the way. I forgot to mention that. And finally, this is the only example I can think of from like recently, and this is even considering that maybe 7 or 8 years ago this came out. This is the first Traffic Death LP, Midwestern band. Traffic Death, Don't Be a Projectile. And yeah, this came out in, I'm trying to remember, between 2012 and 2014, I think. I just picked up their discography CD too. And this is actually probably my least favorite stuff that they did. It's still really good. They seem to like kind of gelled their sound on their latest record, Traffic Death. It's like pretty heavy, like almost grind, but sort of like punk infused, really good. This kind of sounds like they're trying to like force a couple of different genres together, and it's not getting there yet, but it's got kind of like shrieky Nine Shocks Terror kind of vocals and like some grind parts, some fastcore parts. It's very good, but it definitely sounds like they're inspired by a lot of that 2000s and even like late 90s thrashcore stuff, 625 and that kind of shit. But definitely into skateboarding, that's for sure. And that's the only example I can think of it from recently. I think it's kind of like died off, you know, and it's like, I don't know, it's writing a genre of music based around like a sport, for lack of a better term. You know, you could say skateboarding is more of an art form or whatever. That's the eternal debate that's been going on. But basing a kind of a genre of music around something like skateboarding can be a tricky thing, and I think it can be considered to be really cheesy. But I think when skate rock kind of began, it was such a lifestyle thing. It was definitely something you got fucked with for doing a lot in the 80s and even into the 90s. You know, something you get beat up for, just like being a punk rocker or a metalhead or anything else. So at the time, it really made sense, and maybe the reason why it's not a thing anymore is that it's not necessary anymore. It's not, you know, it's just like anything else. Who knows? But those are my deep thoughts. But yeah, long ass update, and it meandered, and I didn't have it very well organized. But what the fuck do you want from me? What am I, Fantano? Talk to you later.